Well, today we're rounding out our investigation of the three primary ethical theories in philosophy. First, we looked at Kant's view, deontology, which was about doing our duty, right? We ought to fulfill our duties. We have certain duties to ourselves, to God, and to others. And we can know if somebody's action is going to be moral or immoral by looking at the principles that they're acting according to, their intentions. Then we looked at utilitarianism, which was a consequentialist view. What was consequentialism again? Does anybody remember? Yeah, Sean.
Whatever decision you make, those consequences have more consequences than consequences after that.
Yeah, that's a feature of consequences generally. It's an ethical view about consequences determining the moral worth of an action. So consequentialism is going to say, it's not your intention that matters, that makes the action moral or immoral. It's the consequences. Did you make the world a better place as a result of your action or not? Did you increase happiness or did you increase suffering? So it's the consequences that matter. Well, today we're going to look at a different ethical theory. One that grounds the morality of actions not in intentions or consequences, but in something else. Something more basic to what it means to be a human and related to what it means to live a good and happy life, a fulfilling life. Yeah?
So wait, consequentialism and utilitarianism isn't like they're different?
They're different. Think of consequentialism as like the big umbrella term, and then utilitarianism as a subtype of it.
Okay.
Yeah. Because, for example, utilitarianism says the consequences that matter are we maximizing happiness in the universe or not? You could come up with your own consequentialist theory that said the consequences that matter are whether or not I get cake. That's what makes an action moral or immoral. That would be silly, but you could believe in that, you know? And that would be different than utilitarianism. So yeah, consequentialism is just kind of the broad category, and utilitarianism is a subtype. Yeah. But today we're looking at what's called virtue theory, which has its roots way back in the philosophy of ancient Greece. Today we're looking at Aristotle. Have you all heard of Aristotle? Pretty famous guy, right? Well, we're looking at the ethical theory that he espoused in his book, The Nicomachean Ethics. So Aristotle has been an incredibly influential person in Western history and philosophy specifically. He was one of the first philosophers to, write on a wide range of things, from metaphysics to rhetoric to biology and zoology. He had his hands in a lot of different fields. And he's somebody who has come to deeply influence, like Plato, all of the philosophers that have come after him. Aristotle was Plato's student, as Plato was Socrates' student. Today we're going to be looking at his ethical theory, which, as we'll see, is based on his conception of human nature, what it means to be an excellent human, and perfecting ourselves. For Aristotle, this is what is a moral and happy life looks like. But he's somebody who is influential not only in the ethical tradition, but also in how we think about politics today, as well as metaphysics and ontology. Just a little historical fact for you. He was actually the personal tutor to Alexander the Great. So this is somebody who was rubbing shoulders with important people during the time of his life. So it's no wonder that the modern world today has been deeply shaped by his life and his writings and his influence. Now, the ethical theory that we're looking at today, that was explored and formulated by Aristotle differs than the first two ethical theories that we've looked at. There are some key differences between these views. So far, when we've been looking at the work of Kant and the work of Mill, they were really concerned with answering the question, what makes an action moral or immoral? Well, Aristotle is also concerned with that question, but his concerns are also broader. In his writings, Aristotle isn't just concerned with telling us what makes an action right or wrong, but in giving us a philosophy of life. A philosophy of life that's going to allow us to not only do good things, but be the best versions of ourselves, and therefore to be happy and fulfilled. What Aristotle is going to be giving us today is not just an ethical theory, but a theory on how to live the proper life, the good life. And for him, the moral life, the happy life, and the healthy life are all part of the same underlying thing. If we want to be good, if we want to be happy and healthy, Aristotle says you should do these things that we're going to talk about today. They're all related. They're all connected. Okay? And what we get from Aristotle's philosophy is a really important idea, first off. The idea that simply knowing what is right and wrong is not going to make you be a good person. What we get from Aristotle's philosophy is this idea that, again, simply knowing what the right and wrong actions are is not sufficient for you living a happy, moral, healthy life. Actually, if you want to become the best version of yourself, if you want to become happy and healthy, and if you want to do good things, you need to transform your character. You need to take on certain habits. You need to get rid of other habits. You need to live your life in a certain way so that when the moral situation presents itself, you'll just naturally do the good thing. It's not enough to know what's right and wrong. You have to mold yourself to be the kind of person that's going to act properly whenever this situation arises. So, ethical knowledge itself is not enough for us to live a fulfilled life, a moral life. There's more that we have to do if we actually want to be a good person. So he's going to say it's important that everybody get not only a good moral education, knowledge about what's right and wrong is important, but what is equally important, perhaps more important, is transforming your character in the proper way. So that naturally you're just going to do the right thing when you're faced with an ethical situation. Thus, instruction and what we might call habituation are required to live the good life. The good life, according to Aristotle, the life that is moral and happy and healthy and fulfilling, is the life that is active. It involves you doing things out there in the world, being a part of things, having relationships with people, and transforming your character in a particular way so that you show up in your relationships in a certain way, so that you think in a certain way, so that you speak and act in a certain way. The starting point of our investigation today is going to be the idea that you are not all that you could be. And what Aristotle is trying to get us to do in his philosophy is to become better versions of ourselves. To become stronger, wiser, healthier. And that by doing these things, by becoming the best version of ourselves that we can, we're naturally going to become better people. Kinder people, more loving, more moral. Any questions so far? Okay. Continuing on. If we wanted to encapsulate one of the central ideas of Aristotle's view, it would be this. Being a good person is going to require self-improvement and perfection of the individual. Maybe we shouldn't say being a good person is going to require perfection, but it's going to require you to be better than you are now, to improve yourself, to improve how you think, how you speak, and how you act. Aristotle is pushing us in his philosophy to rise out of our mediocrity, okay? Because you know you're not living how you should. You know you're doing things that are holding you back, that are keeping you down. You know that the way that you think and the things that you do are preventing you from being the best version of yourselves. So Aristotle's trying to get us to realize that. He's trying to push us in the right direction. Another aspect of Aristotle's view is that he's going to stipulate that moral actions, if we want to be good people, if we want to do right things, are those actions that fulfill our function as human beings. See, Aristotle has a particular conception of human nature, as we'll see. He thinks everything that exists has a function. What it means to do good things and to be the best versions of ourselves involves us fulfilling our function. And we'll talk about what that is here in a little bit. This function is going to be related to our distinctive nature as rational creatures. And so, to kind of encapsulate everything that we've been talking about so far, this is the view that Aristotle is going to be arguing for and making a case for. It's known as virtue theory. Virtue theory is the view that the morality of an action is determined by the degree to which that action proceeds from one or more of the virtues. We're going to get into it more today about what virtues are, what they look like. But this is a word you've heard before, right? Virtues, embodying the virtues. It's kind of an older way of speaking about being a good person. But basically what Aristotle has in mind here is if you want to be good, you have to develop the virtue of generosity, of courage, of wisdom, of friendliness. In order to do this, you need to mold your character in a certain way so that how you act is just naturally generous and loving and wise and friendly and witty and just and all of these things. But it's something that we have to work at. So, the degree to which your actions are going to be moral are the degree to which you embody those virtues and your actions flow from those virtues. Make sense? Okay. Let's now get into Aristotle's argument. How Aristotle sets up this ethical theory, how he motivates it. Aristotle starts his analysis by talking about what we do in human life and our motivations for doing things. He makes a distinction between what he calls instrumental activities and intrinsic activities. He says, look, some things we do in our lives, we do for a further goal or for something else, right? Like, for example, what you're doing right now. Why are you sitting in this room listening to me? Because you're trying to get a degree, right? Or you're trying to get a job down the line, or you're trying to get a good grade, right? What you're doing right now, this activity, is instrumental for some further goal or dream or aim that you have, right? So some activities are like that. We do them so that we can get something else down the line. But some activities are what he calls intrinsic. Activities that we do just because we enjoy the activity itself. What are some activities like that for you? Something that you just do because you find it good and valuable in and of itself. You're not doing it for money or fame. You're just doing it because you like it. Yeah.
Gym.
The gym, you like working out, right? You're not trying to become like the world's biggest bodybuilder, right? You are? Yeah?
Okay.
Okay, so maybe the gym for you is an instrumental activity. Maybe for you, you just like doing it, right? You like working out. You like the feeling it gives you, right? You feel powerful, strong. Yeah.
Going outside, enjoying the outdoors.
Just hanging out in nature, right? Yeah, you find that enjoyable. Good in and of itself, right? Aristotle stipulates all our pursuits or activities aim at some end or goal, what he calls a good. Horsemanship, for example, is one of the things he talks about in this book. Why might a culture engage in rearing and domesticating horses? Well, so they can travel to other places, so they can use them in warfare, right? Horsemanship is often an instrumental activity. Well, when we start asking why we engage in the activities that we do, what we come to realize is all of our activities at the end of the day are aiming at some ultimate end or goal. Whether we realize it or not, whether we've consciously thought about it or not. All of what we do, we're doing for the sake of some end. We're pursuing some goal. But not all of our activities could be instrumental. Why? Well, that would lead to an infinite regress. If everything you did was for the sake of something else, there would be no end to that, right? So there must be something at the end of the chain of activities that you engage in, some ultimate end or goal that we're all pursuing as human beings. What Aristotle's doing in his philosophy is he's going to tell us what that is, and then he's going to tell us how to get there. He's going to tell us all what we're searching for ultimately in our lives, and he's going to show us how we can acquire it. Can anybody guess what this thing is that we're all reaching for, working towards? Exactly. It's happiness. At least according to what Aristotle believes. Okay? He says we're all looking for happiness. The Greek word for this is eudaimonia. Okay? He says the ultimate thing that we're all searching for, that we're all chasing after, is flourishing. That is the best translation of eudaimonia that we have, flourishing. So we're going to use this word flourishing because it's a little bit different than how we think about happiness nowadays, though we often use these two words interchangeably. Okay? We're all trying to achieve a flourishing life where we're thriving. That's what we're all after. And so here's what he has to say about that. So if what is done has some end that we want for its own sake, and everything else we want is for the sake of this end, and if we do not choose everything for the sake of something else, because this would lead to an infinite progression, making our desire fruitless and vain, then clearly this will be the good, indeed the chief good. Surely then knowledge of the good must be very important for our lives. And if, like archers, we have a target, are we not more likely to hit the right mark if we know what it is? If so, we must try at least roughly to comprehend this chief thing that we're all seeking after, and which science or faculty is concerned with it. And here's a very interesting point that he makes. Knowledge of this chief good would seem to be the concern of the most authoritative science, the highest master science. That is the most important discipline. And this is obviously the science of politics. That's a strange thing to say, right? Because it lays down which of the sciences there should be in cities and which each class of person should learn and up to what level. Since political science employs the other sciences and also lays down laws about what we should do and refrain from, its end will include the ends of all the others and will therefore be the human good. Our inquiry, then, is a kind of political science, since these are the ends it is aiming at. In academia, we don't often equate figuring out what's right and what's good with political science, do we? Do we? Do we study political science in college to figure out what's good and what's right and how we should live our lives?
No.
It doesn't seem like we do that nowadays, right?
No.
But here's the point that Aristotle is making. You should care deeply about political science. Why? Because political science governs what we are allowed to do in our society. Why? What the goals of setting ourselves up in this way are. What is legal? What is illegal? How education is run. What you get taught in school. These are all things concerned with how we run our society, the science of politics. So politics is actually deeply important to basically everything that we think and do as members of a society. And that's what Aristotle is trying to get us to realize here. It's not important that you fully internalize what Aristotle is saying here, but I'd like you to think about it a little bit more when you have time. Political science, as he says, lays down which of the sciences there should be. That is what you are capable of studying, what you're allowed to know, what you're allowed to say, what you're allowed to think, and which class of person should learn and up to what level. So, Aristotle's conclusion is that if we want to figure out how to live the good life, the fulfilling life, the happy life, we need to concern ourselves with political theory and the nature of how we do and should organize ourselves in society. Okay, moving on. Aristotle's made this pretty commonsensical claim, which is we're all seeking after flourishing, right? We all want to be happy. That's what we're after in our lives, right? But we still don't have a clear grasp on what that looks like, right? What does it mean to be happy? How do we become happy people and therefore fulfilled people and moral people? How do we become flourishing people? Well, he considers a few things. He says, if you ask the layperson what happiness is, they'll say, well, happiness has to do with being pleasurable, right? Acquiring pleasure in your life. Aristotle thinks about this a little bit and he's like, nah, happiness is not the same as pleasure, right? Because people can be fulfilled and happy without constantly doing drugs and having sex and eating good food, right? These base pleasures, he says, his argument is not that involved. His argument is, this life is unfit for humans, chasing after base pleasures all the time. He's kind of like Mill in that regard. He thinks we're capable of these things higher than just the base pleasures. So he says happiness is not the same as pleasure. If you just seek after bodily pleasures, that's not necessarily going to make you happy. And then he says, well, some people say wealth is what's going to make us happy. But wealth doesn't always make people happy, right? And why do people acquire wealth?
To have power.
To have power, to have more control over their lives. He says wealth isn't the thing that we're ultimately aiming at. Maybe wealth can help us buy some measure of happiness, but wealth is not the chief thing that we're searching after. Wealth is not going to be sufficient for us to be flourishing. Then finally, he considers honor. He says, well, maybe we'll be able to live flourishing lives if we are honored by people, if we obtain honor. And he says, no, this isn't the thing that we're seeking after at the end of the day either, because why do people want to be honored? Because if you're honored, then people treat you right, and people are nice to you. So, when it comes to pleasure, wealth, and honor, these things are not what we're ultimately after. We're after for what pleasure, wealth, and honor can get us. We're after something beyond pleasure, wealth, and honor. So, flourishing is not equal to pleasure, wealth, or honor. It's something besides these things. He says our ultimate goal is living a life of thriving, flourishment, This is what we're ultimately after. He says, this thing alone, living a flourishing life, is self-sufficient. What he means by that is, if you were living a flourishing life, you wouldn't want for anything. You wouldn't need anything else. You wouldn't want anything else if your life was flourishing. So it's self-sufficient. Flourishing alone is sufficient for you to be happy and fulfilled. And he also says it's choosable for its own sake. Right? We're not seeking after flourishing for something else. We're seeking after flourishing just because flourishing itself is good. And he says it's lacking nothing. Again, if we could achieve this life of flourishing, we wouldn't need anything else to be happy. We wouldn't be seeking after anything else in our lives. So this is what happiness is. It's flourishment. It's living a life of thriving. That's what we're all seeking after. That's what we're trying to do in our lives. Even though sometimes we do it stupidly, right? And we do things that actually don't allow us to live a flourishing life. But we'll get there. So, let's break it down a little bit further. We're all after a thriving life, a flourishing life. What exactly does that look like? And how exactly do we get there? Well, in order to understand Aristotle's view on this, we need to go through a little bit more of his argument and his analysis. One philosophical jargony word that we can use to describe Aristotle's view is that his conception of living a flourishing life is teleological. What is meant by this is he thinks that things in the universe operate the way they do because they have some sort of purpose or function. The same thing is going to be true of humans. Humans have some sort of purpose or function. And, he says, in order for a thing to be good, it needs to fulfill its purpose or its function. So, if we want to be good, if we want to be happy, if we want to live a flourishing life, we ought to fulfill our purpose or function as human beings. Take a hammer, for example. What does a hammer do? What is the function of a hammer?
Hammer and nail or something else?
It hammers things, right? That's what a good hammer does. It hammers things well. What is the function of a violinist?
Play the violin.
They play the violin well, right? A good violinist plays the violin well. Would this controller make a good hammer? Trying to hammer in some nails. What do you think? No, right? It's not hard enough. It's not going to hammer in nails well, right? This thing's going to fucking break if I tried to hammer in nails with it.
How do the nail is?
If it's made of metal and you're going into hard wood, that ain't going to be good. Would this mug, bless you, would this mug make a good weapon? What do you think? In the hands of a normal person, not like a spy or an assassin? No, right? This would not make a good weapon. What does a good weapon do? It kills well, right? That's what a good weapon does. A gun or a bomb, that's a way better weapon than this, right?
Well, not all guns are designed to kill.
True. Maybe maim. So things have different functions, okay? This table, its function is to allow things to be resting on it, right? To hold things up. That's what a good table does. Humans also have a function, okay? Although our function is going to be a little bit different than hammers, mugs, laptops, weapons, etc. If we can reflect on human nature and what we are like, what our properties are, that will give us an idea as to what our function is. And if we know what our function is, then we'll be able to do what we're supposed to do well. And if you're following Aristotle, he says, if we're doing what we're supposed to do well, we're going to be happy. We're going to be good. We'll be a good human. Just like a good hammer hammers well, a good human is a human who humans well. So what does it mean to human? What does it mean to human well? Well, that's the next question that Aristotle gets into. The thing that differentiates humans from all other things in existence is that we have a mind or a soul. Aristotle uses these words interchangeably because he's using this Greek word, nous. In our contemporary age, we distinguish between the mind and the soul, and we say they're different things. Don't worry about that. What Aristotle means is humans have this thing called a consciousness. That's what he's talking about. And that's what distinguishes us from things like tables and chairs and violins and hammers. And the fact that we can act rationally, reflect on things with reason, the fact that we have reflection separates us from the other living organisms on Earth. Right? Plants can't reflect. I doubt your dog can reflect on whether or not it wants to eat the treat or if it should eat the treat.
If you teach him.
Well, it won't eat the treat if you tell him to stop. But can your dog think to itself, I wonder if I should eat that treat. Will that treat make me fat? Is that, good for my diet? Most people are going to say no, animals don't have that capability. Aristotle doesn't think that animals do. So if we're following his line of argument, he says, humans are special in that they can reflect and that they have a consciousness that can reflect. Okay? So he's going to say what it means to human well is to use that consciousness in a particular way. Using this consciousness in the right way is what it means to fulfill our function. And so he says in this book, human flourishing is an activity of the soul, or mind, or consciousness, expressing complete virtue in a complete lifetime. This is a little vague, but we're going to continue to break this down so that you understand it. In other words, he says, a flourishing life, happiness, is a kind of living well and acting well. So, if we want to live a happy life, a healthy life, a moral life, remember, these are all part of the same thing for Aristotle. If we want to be happy, healthy, and moral, we need to live and act a certain way. A certain way that utilizes our nous, our consciousness. What we're after is excellence. We're trying to human excellently. And part of what that involves is using our mind in a particular way to govern our actions, to govern our behavior. You all following along? Okay. So, we might ask, he says, a flourishing life is one that expresses complete virtue in a complete lifetime. What does it mean to express virtue? What is virtue? How do we be virtuous? Well, let's break it down. And we have another long, kind of general, vague statement from Aristotle, but I'll make it accessible to you. He says, being virtuous is an activity, not a state. A virtue is a disposition to feel the right emotions, act the right way, at the right time, toward the right persons, with the right intensity, from the right motive. That's what it means to human excellently. It means to have the proper emotions, act the proper way, at the proper time, toward the proper people, with the proper intensity, from the right motive or intention. So first things first. What's up with this caveat here? Being virtuous is an activity, not a state. Well, this goes back to what I was trying to distinguish at the beginning of class. We think of happiness in our day and age as a state. It's a state you go in and out of, right? Some days you're happy, some days you're not. Some days you're occupying the state of sadness, some days you're occupying the state of happiness. That's not what Aristotle thinks is going to make us fulfilled. Living a thriving life, being happy and moral, is not a mental state. It's an activity. Being thriving, living a thriving life, he says, has to do with activity. It means doing stuff. And you kind of know this intuitively, right? Are you happier when you just sit around all day watching YouTube? Or are you happier when you're kicking the soccer ball with your friends or going out with your friends? Maybe watching YouTube for 12 hours is kind of pleasurable, but you get kind of sick of it, right? And you get kind of sick of yourself. You're like, I should be fucking doing something, right? Well, that's something that Aristotle latched onto a long time ago. So, first of all, if we want to live a thriving life, we got to be active. We got to do shit. Secondly, we need to cultivate a certain character. That is, we need to cultivate certain dispositions. What's a disposition? Yeah.
Where you stand on something, like your point of opinion.
That might be part of it. Yeah. I think that's one definition.
A bad outlook.
Say that again?
Like a bad outlook on life.
No, it's different than that. Yeah.
Like an attitude or like mood towards something?
Yeah, you might say a disposition is a tendency. A disposition is a tendency to think or act in a certain way. So, if somebody has a happy disposition, they tend to look at things optimistically and, be positive and extroverted or whatever. Well, Aristotle says if we want to live a thriving life, we need to mold our characters in such a way so that we think and act just naturally in certain ways. The dispositions that we're trying to cultivate, the tendencies, the inner tendencies that we're trying to cultivate, are those that make us feel the right emotions and act the right way at the right time toward the right persons with the right intensity from the right motive. This might sound a little vague to you, but you kind of already know what this is. Let's take an example. Let's say I borrow you my Nickelback CD. I lend it to you. Okay, and I love Nickelback, okay? It's even signed by Chad Kroeger and everything. And you're listening to it, and you're like, this music sucks, and you break my CD. Then you hand it back to me. I'm pretty upset, right, that you broke my Nickelback CD. Would it be appropriate for me to feel so angered that I want to kill you? Would that be the right emotion? No, that's going overboard, right? Somebody breaking your CD and you're like, I want to kill him! Like, that's insane, right? That's not the proper emotion to feel in that situation, right? Now, if you cut my brake lines on my car and I almost die, then maybe it would be proper for me to feel that angry towards you, right? Because you almost cost me my life. We kind of have an intuitive sense of how we're supposed to react to things in our life, right? What emotions are appropriate to feel at which times, how intense they're supposed to be, who they're supposed to be directed at. If you break my Nickelback CD and I get mad at Jaden, that would be stupid, right? There's no sense in that. That's not directing my emotion towards the proper person, right? Right intensity, right? Let's use another example. You throw a surprise party for me. I am so happy and excited that I have a seizure or something of ecstasy and happiness. Is that the right intensity for that kind of thing? No, that's going way overboard, right? Or if you throw a surprise party for me and I feel nothing about it, I'm just like, okay. And I walk into the... No, right? I should feel at least a little happy that you did something nice for me. Right? Or how about at the right time? Let's talk about that. You cut the brake lines on my car, and I decide I am going to wait 10 years, and then I'll be mad at them and exact my revenge. Is that feeling the emotions at the proper time? No, right? The appropriate time to feel the emotions would be right after I almost die. And then they should taper off, right? I shouldn't be eternally mad at you. Right? So, do you kind of understand what he's saying here? What we want to do is transform our character so that we feel the proper emotions towards certain situations, and we react and think in ways that are proper to each situation. Make sense? That's basically what we're trying to do. That's how we should reform our characters, Aristotle thinks, so that we live a happy, fulfilled, healthy life. Now, this has a lot to do with our attitudes, our moods, our reactions to things. Let's actually talk about how we should act if we're going to live a thriving life. Well, Aristotle is going to say there are certain things that we need to do, certain habits that we should cultivate, not only certain ideas and emotions and moods, but certain habits and behaviors that we should cultivate if we want to be a thriving person. Some things we should all be working on. What do humans need to live a thriving life? Well, for us, some things are going to be the same. We all need to get a proper amount of sleep. We all need to eat a proper diet. We all need to regulate our emotions in a proper way. Right? We need to be social. A certain level of sociality is required for humans to be happy. Right? We can't just be isolated all the time. All of us should be working on that stuff. We need to get our sleep schedule under control. We need to limit alcohol and drugs. We need to engage in a certain amount of physical activity. Those things objectively are necessary for humans to live a thriving life. But there are some things that we're going to do differently relative to the particular ends and goals and dreams that we have. For example, if you are trying to become an awesome bodybuilder, you are going to live in such a way that you're counting your calories and your protein intake and your carb intake. And if you're trying to become really ripped and big, you're going to eat a lot, right? Michael Phelps, how many calories does he eat a day?
At least 10,000.
When he's training, at least 10,000. Would it be virtuous for me to eat 10,000 calories in a day? No, I'd balloon up and explode. And I'd feel like shit all the time. Because that's not my goal, okay? I'm not trying to become an Olympic swimmer, so I should not be eating 10,000 calories a day. If you want to become a champion soccer player, you're going to spend time on the field. You're going to train. You're going to practice your shooting and your dribbling and all that stuff. You're going to spend time doing that. That's good for you, okay? But the person who wants to become a chess grandmaster shouldn't be spending 4 hours a day on the soccer field, right? That's not good for them or their goals or anything. So does that make sense? In some ways, what we should be doing because it's objectively necessary for us to be thriving. But there are also things that are going to differ between us, things that we should work on that are relative to our own personal goals. If you're trying to be a champion wrestler, for example, you're going to eat a lot and work out a lot. But that's not going to help out the person who wants to be Scrabble champion. Right? The person who wants to be Scrabble champion, they should be working on Scrabble, not eating a lot and working out a lot. Make sense? So, what being virtuous looks like for each of us is going to vary a little bit depending on our own personal goals. But then there are some things that we should all be working on, like sleep, diet, exercise, mood regulation, all that stuff. Chemical balances in the brain. We don't want to be chemically imbalanced. We should all be working on that stuff. Makes sense? Does this point make sense? So, another thing that we need to bring up is, remember, Aristotle is saying if we want to be happy and moral, we need to work on becoming the best versions of ourselves. Well, there's a moral component to that, there's a physical component, and there's an intellectual component. What does becoming the best version of yourself intellectually look like? It means becoming smarter, becoming wiser, developing wisdom, developing prudence so that you know what to do in a certain situation, right? You know how to solve problems. You know how to deal with the throes of life. So we need to work on ourselves intellectually, but we also need to work on ourselves morally. That means we need to work on becoming more generous, more honest, more witty, more friendly, right? Because wit is a good thing. Being funny is a good thing. So, different domains of our lives that we need to work on. There's the physical, there's the intellectual, you might say there's the psychological, there's the moral. If we want to be good people, we need to work on all of these areas of our lives. It's not good enough just to be a nice person. You also need to become as wise as you can be. And if we take a page out of Socrates, you might also believe that, quoting him, each person owes it to himself to see what his body is capable of. Maybe we also have some sort of obligation to ourselves to work on ourselves physically. Aristotle would say that, I think. So, we want to cultivate intellectual virtues and moral virtues. We want to be good people and we want to be smart people if we can. We acquire these virtues through education, like you're getting now, and practice. That means actually going out in the world, exposing yourselves to novel situations, and practicing doing the right thing. That means engaging in study. That means practicing being generous when the opportunity presents itself. Somebody needs a pen in class. How do you cultivate the virtue of generosity? You're like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to be generous. Here, take my pen. Right? So we need to put ourselves in situations where we can practice the virtues, where we can work on developing those dispositions so we just do the generous, honest, courageous, loving thing naturally. We want to make it second nature. We want to make it a part of ourselves. Okay, so we don't have to think about it. Aristotle furthers his analysis by saying that virtues proceed from what he calls a mean state between deficiency and excess. And here's what he means by that. Think of any virtue, any way that you could think or act. According to Aristotle, you can act with an excess or a deficiency of that thing. And you don't want to do it too much. You don't want to do it too little. You don't want to do it with too little of intensity or too large of an intensity. You're trying to hit a sweet spot when you're thinking and acting. I think this graph will help make it a little clear. Let's look at the virtue of courage. The courageous person, what are they like? Do courageous people feel fear? Yes? That's the correct answer. Courageous people feel fear, but they act in spite of their fear. They don't let their fear hold them back. Right? That's what it means to be courageous. It means even though you're feeling fear, you still go out there and do the thing. Okay? You don't want to be somebody who's a coward, who's completely held back by their fear, who feels their fear so intensely that it prevents them from acting and doing good stuff. That would be a deficiency of courage. But you also don't want to have an excess of courage. You don't want to be a rash person who just runs into every situation without thinking about things and doesn't, consider them. Right? Because what's going to happen? You're going to kill yourself and other people. Right? If all the generals and all the soldiers of all the armies in the earth were just rash, they would just all die, right? Because they're not thinking about military strategy. They're not thinking about how they can best protect themselves and their families, whatever. So, when we're trying to act virtuously, we want to make sure we don't have an excess or a deficiency of various traits. Let's take another example. Generosity. Being generous means we're not overly stingy. Mine, keeping it to myself, nobody can have it. We don't want to be like that. But we also don't want to constantly be giving all of our crap away. Why? Well, that would be stupid and it would be bad form. If you give all your stuff away, you can no longer be generous because you don't have anything to give. Okay? So we don't want to have an excess or a deficiency. We want to be in the sweet spot. Let's look at honesty. Being appropriately honest, according to Aristotle, means not keeping everything a secret. Right? Sometimes you got to say things. Sometimes you got to tell people uncomfortable truths. But it also means you don't be a blunt asshole. Right? Hey, Jenna, you're looking really fat today. I think you could get on the treadmill. What do you think? No, right? That's an excess of honesty. Right? We don't go around saying shit like that. There are things that you say, and you got to say them in a particular way. Right? So, is this making sense? When we're acting virtuously, we want to be balanced. We don't want to have an excess or a deficiency of that trait. Make sense? Okay, this is what Aristotle means when he says virtuous action proceeds from a mean state between these things. Basically, if we want to cultivate the proper character so that we live a happy, healthy, moral life, that involves us harmonizing the various forces within ourselves and holding them in balance. Kind of like a psychological, wooey way of describing it, but I think it gets the point across well. So, if we want to be good people, we need to go out there and do stuff. We need to expose ourselves to situations where we can practice being a good, smart person, where we can practice humaning excellently. Okay? To summarize, being virtuous involves harmonizing the opposing forces, motivations, and desires within you, and prioritizing them in the proper way. For example, you should prioritize making yourself healthy over just watching your 3,000th YouTube video. Right? You have to organize your life in the proper way. That means you should prioritize telling your girlfriend the truth rather than, running away and never having a difficult conversation in your life. It means prioritizing generosity over being a stingy prick. It means organizing your life in such a way and your mind in such a way so that you just do the right thing. And you don't skirt on your responsibilities. You don't skirt on your duties and obligations. Aristotle is going to say that if you follow this protocol, you're going to not only love yourself in the appropriate way, but it's also compatible with treating other people the way that they ought to be treated. He says if you become the best version of yourself, if you continue to work on yourself, that is going to result in you treating yourself appropriately and others appropriately. There doesn't have to be a tension between self-love and self-care and ethical treatment of other people. If you're organizing your life properly, if you're building the right habits and attitudes and outlooks and dispositions, you're going to love yourself right and you're going to love others right. Thus, the virtuous person is the best version of themselves, and they will naturally treat other people in the way that they deserve to be treated. They will treat others appropriately, justly. And Aristotle thinks if we do this, if we try to become the best versions of ourselves, if we strive after that, not only will we feel happy and fulfilled, but we'll also be good people to others. We'll be honest, we'll be just, we'll be courageous, and we'll be healthy. We'll be psychologically and physically healthy. But we got to work on ourselves, all right? Because we are not all that we could be. You could be more loving. You could be more fit. You could be wiser. You could be more honest. You could be more courageous. Aristotle is saying, get to it, bro. Okay? If you want to live a happy, fulfilled, healthy, moral life, you got to work on yourself. But, and this is a big but, you may not agree with this. Aristotle says it's not possible for everybody to become virtuous. It's not possible for everybody to live happy, healthy, moral, and fulfilling lives. Why? There are certain requirements to obtaining a flourishing life. One of these is a good moral education. He thinks that if you don't have a good moral education, you're not going to be able to figure out what's right and what's wrong. You're not going to be able to figure out how to orient your life, what to prioritize. You're not going to figure out how you should act. So, you got to have a good moral education. You got to learn what's right and what's wrong, how to treat people appropriately, how to solve problems, all that stuff. If you don't have that knowledge, you're only going to get so far in trying to improve yourself and being a good person. Secondly, he says, look, you need the knowledge, right? You need a certain amount of knowledge to live a thriving life, but more so than that, you need to have experience in moral matters. That means if you're trying to figure out how to be generous, you actually have to have experienced situations in which you could practice that. If you're trying to be friendly, you got to have experiences hanging out with people. You can't master friendliness if you're never hanging out with people, right? You can't master generosity if you never practice it. You can't master honesty if you never say anything. Right? So you got to put yourself in situations where you can practice these things. Practice being a good person. You can't just sit in your room all day watching TikToks. Okay? And finally, and this is the most controversial point, he says that certain external goods are required for becoming virtuous, for living a thriving life. That is, he says, you need a certain amount of resources, wealth, friends, and certain privileges, and actually in order to achieve this. His argument goes something like this. Look, how are you going to become generous if you don't have something to give? If you're dirt poor, fighting for your life constantly, you're not going to be able to master generosity because you're not going to have anything to give people. Similarly, you're not going to be able to master friendliness if you don't hang out with people, if you don't have any friends. If nobody wants to hang out with you, you can't practice being nice to others, right? If people just run away when they see you, you're not going to be able to practice the social virtues. One of the things that he says, and this is a little blunt, is the ugly man is seldom happy. So Aristotle thinks if you're too ugly, you're not going to be able to live a flourishing life because people are going to treat you like crap because you're ugly. I mean, there's not much we can do about that, right? If we're ugly, we're ugly. So I guess some people, according to Aristotle, are just not destined for happiness. I don't know. In any case, he says this isn't something everybody can do. Like, look, you need time, you need to put in the effort, and you need certain resources in order to live a thriving life. I think it's something that it is within the realm of possibility for a lot of people in our situation, but Aristotle would say, look, a lot of people are never going to become happy because they just don't have the means to. They were given a bad hand. He says that's the hard truth of it. You don't have to agree with him on that, though. Okay? You don't have to agree with this part of his view. Yeah?
So would Aristotle say that you should just ignore the fact that major regions in the world cannot be happy and just live a full life by yourself and just ignore them? Or what's the deal?
That's a good question. Will you hold on to that? Well, I want to come back to it here in a few minutes because that's a great question. So let me just summarize the view for you, and then we can talk about maybe some issues with Aristotle's view, right? Maybe some weaknesses. Here's what we get from Aristotle's view. The good and wise person performs good and wise actions. The bad and unwise person performs bad and unwise actions. If we want to live happy, healthily, a thriving life where we're good people, we need to make ourselves good and wise. Okay? We need to make ourselves good and wise so that we can naturally do the good and wise things. We need to habituate ourselves to be good and wise people. That means working on it, putting in effort, putting in time and energy, devoting resources to your own self-improvement and self-perfection. Maybe all it is a journey. Maybe we're never ever going to be perfect. But Aristotle says you got to walk the path at least. You got to try to become the best version of yourself. Because if you don't try to become the best version of yourself, you're not going to be able to achieve a life of ultimate goodness or happiness. We can make ourselves wise and good by engaging in an active lifestyle, by engaging in education, by practicing being a good person, by practicing problem solving, by using our minds, by thinking things through. We make ourselves wise and good through an active lifestyle, through study, by facing our fears, by trying to push past our limits, by philosophical inquiry, by strengthening your body, by strengthening your mind, by overcoming your traumas, by doing difficult things. Okay? Has anybody here heard of David Goggins? Crazy guy, right? If Aristotle was alive today and wasn't so Greek, he'd probably be like David Goggins or something. He'd be like, you got to get out there and get it, man. You got to do hard shit. Make yourself stronger, better, okay? That's what Aristotle is pushing us to do. Because he says, if we work on ourselves, if we make ourselves better, that will make us good people, we'll be good, moral, and we'll be happy. So, what do y'all think about this view? You like this view? Is it cool? Do you dislike it? Is it dumb? What are you thinking? You like it. Why do you like it? Because you agree with it. Any other reasons? Do you think he's got like a good argument here? A good outlook?
Yeah. That's how I try to live my life.
And how's that working out for you?
Maybe pretty good.
Are you depressed?
Yes.
Well, maybe that's too personal a question. Are you so down in the dumps that you can never find happiness? No. Right? You're doing stuff, you're making memories, you're having fun, right? And that's a good thing, right? Good. Yeah.
I think it has its flaws, but it's much less flawed than some of the other stuff we've looked at.
You think so?
Yeah, I think that like by pursuing happiness and fulfillment, as long as you assume that everyone has a moral compass, like that they know a difference between right and wrong, and someone isn't going to find joy in the wrong things, that it's one of the better moral theories.
Okay. So you're saying that you like it, but like look, maybe some people like they have the wrong desires and they find joy in the wrong things, and maybe that throws a wrench in some of this.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd find this way more valuable and way more realistic in a sense than utilitarianism.
You think so? Okay. You think this is easier to do? Easier to follow?
I'm thinking that unlike utilitarianism, it really doesn't state that, how can I word this?
Take your time. Yeah.
Now, utilitarianism, my problem with it is that whatever you can do, whatever is done, right, whatever is good might not be good in a sense.
Okay.
Happiness and
But you think following Aristotle's protocol here, you think, yeah, it's going to lead to people being good and happy. You think there's some truth in there at least?
yeah.
Yeah? Okay, yeah.
I think anything's going to have its flaws, but like this is kind of like the best we can do is to live a flourishing life for ourselves and set an example for other people.
Okay, yeah, Aristotle's big on that. I'll give you to Jocelyn first, and then I want to go through perhaps some weaknesses with this.
Okay, I'll make it fast. I do agree with like most of us wanting to hear about like how it is like it's less flawed, but the only thing I'm confused about is like didn't he say that it like wasn't a mental thing? It was like you have to like get up and do activities, but like
Yeah.
the motivation to like get up and do activities, like what if like you are depressed, you don't have that motivation, or are you just kind of like or like
Well, Aristotle would say, look, there are things that you can work on. You know, look, how do you make it so that you can actually get the motivation to better yourself? Maybe it starts with sleep. Maybe it starts with no screens before bed for an hour. Maybe it starts with actually eating a diet of food that is not processed. You know? So there are little things he's going to say that we could do to start on the path. But yeah, some people are certainly not in a state right now to follow this through, right? Insofar as we are all kind of where we are at on our journey, maybe there are barriers for each one of us that we're struggling with, right?
I will say though that I think this one is like the hardest to follow, but it's like the most beneficial in a way because I feel like working on yourself is like really difficult.
Yeah.
Like it might be one of the hardest things you actually can do is to like act in like a virtuous way and stuff. But I do think though, I know you're gonna talk about the laws, but I just don't think that's like a good assumption to say that like you need a good moral education to like really flourish in life and yeah, because I don't know. But then it just makes me think about like the hand that we're given, like how does that fit like whether you can be a virtuous like person and like I don't think that's fair.
Right. Right. So there are things that you might ask about this view, right? For example, how important is it really for us to try to become the best versions of ourselves? Do we need to do that to be happy and fulfilled? Is that what's going to make us happy? You might just question that being the best version of yourself is actually going to lead you to a flourishing life, right? Maybe it won't. Maybe you think a flourishing life is hooking yourself up to VR and just being in the simulation or something like that. You might say, is this view a little self-centered? Right? It's so centered on each individual trying to improve themselves. Where's the social justice here, right? Where's the concern about people in other classes and other social groups? Does this view actually help us solve social, economic, political problems? You might criticize it on those grounds, right? In an age in which people are very concerned with social justice, you might say, this view ain't going to solve our social problems. So you might criticize it on those grounds, right? What is this view going to do for the people who are starving in other parts of the world? You know, would it be callous to go over there and tell them, this is how you ought to live, guys? You know, another thing to think about. I don't know. So, again, there are weaknesses to this view as well. Another weakness, is the last thing I'll leave you with, is Aristotle's own view of virtue that I didn't cover. If you dig deep into Aristotle's philosophy, he thinks that maybe only a handful of people at any given time are actually virtuous. So he thinks actually doing this is really fucking hard, because he believes that you can't have one virtue, you can't have just one. You either have all of them or you have none of them, which is pretty strict, right? And the reason he thinks that is because he thinks that the virtues are interdependent. He thinks you can't be properly generous without being properly courageous, and you can't be properly honest without being properly friendly. So he thinks they all hang together like that. But anyway, that's virtue theory. Think about it. Talk about it with your friends. Ask them what they think. All right. Any questions, concerns, comments?
The political science is really interesting.
Right. Yeah. The next ethical theory we'll look at is going to be more concerned with those problems. Yeah. Okay. Make sure to sign the attendance sheet if it didn't get around to you.
Or is it?
And have a good weekend.